Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Robin Rothenberg, author of Restoring Prana and program director for Essential Yoga Therapy. And I am here with Melissa Campagnolo and William Hufschmidt. And we are going to have a conversation about um, breathing and the effect of breathing on health and ways that you can learn more about the effect of breathing on your health so that you can live healthier and that you can also work with your clients and your students either as a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, or other kind of healthcare practitioner to support them in becoming healthier through functional breathing and learning what that means. So, welcome, Melissa and William. Melissa is a longtime mentor for my Restore Your Prana training program and also now a mentor for my yoga therapy program. And William is a student in the Restore Your Prana program. And I invited William here to share about his experience because his journey has been, unfortunately, um, a, a, one that was shared probably by, well, for sure, by many people in terms of having experienced long COVID. Um, and he found the Restore Your Prana training and has it's impacted his life in various ways. And so I invited him to share about what that's been like for him, starting with COVID and long COVID, and then how he found the program and what his experience has been with that. So welcome, William.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah, so let's wind back the clock a bit to when you first got COVID and then realized that it wasn't, the symptoms were not abating, and what happened from there.
Sure. I was one of the early people that got sick with COVID. I was sick in February 2020 before the world changed. And
Oh,
the
early.
and technically, that was before there was testing, was before there was any understanding of it. When I got sick, it was the worst illness I've ever had in my life. It was the worst part of it was 10 consecutive days where every day I didn't think I could feel more ill, and then the next day I was even worse until it finally began to start abating. And I had gone to the doctor. They did like a flu test, and I was negative for flu. And looking back on it, like the people, medical care practitioners I was working with said, there's no way I could have been as sick as I was and been negative for flu at that point. It wasn't like just a cold or anything. So hindsight, looking back, is how I determined that I had COVID at that time.
Yeah.
And then in the recovery afterwards, I would say for the rest of 2020 and into 2021, there were there were things that were going on that just didn't seem normal. I'd be fine, and then I would have these long periods of exhaustion where even sleeping all the time, I didn't feel recovered. I couldn't wake up and feel rested at all. Um, Most of I think the worst of it I got was in my ears. When I was sick, my ears had filled up with fluid, and
Mm.
it took over 4 weeks for the fluid to start to subside. And when I went back for a recheck for my annual physical in later May in 2020, there was still fluid behind my ears. It still hadn't drained out. And so for me, I had two main, oops, sorry, I lost my little ear thing, two main pieces coming up. One symptom that I had was it felt like in my chest somebody had their hand and was squeezing my heart, like just this gripping sensation on my heart. In fact, one time it happened when I was in the doctor's office for my physical, and I was having this major heart clenching kind of experience, and they did a heart test, EKG, I think, and and they said, "Oh, your heart's normal. There's nothing wrong with it." And I knew in the moment I was having this experience, and they're telling me that there was nothing wrong with my heart. They told me it was anxiety. They told me I was, having some mental health issues, and that was what was causing it. And and the other main piece that I was working with was mental health issues. I had, um, if looking back on it, it feels like any PTSD kind of trauma related event I had in my life all came to the fore at the same time.
Mhm.
And it really affected my dreaming. I was having horribly violent nightmares for a long period of time. Um, and I think a lot of that was my tendency towards sleep apnea and snoring had gotten way out of control, and that was affecting my sleep. I'm a single person. I live alone, so I didn't have anybody.
I'm
I was
not
just
sure what
trying
that
to.
was.
Okay. I living alone and sleeping alone, like I didn't have anybody that could tell me I was, not breathing while I was sleeping. But I think that was strongly contributing to it. Um, the Also the other thing I had noticed is I've been a long time yoga practitioner, and I've had a really strong asana practice and an incredibly strong pranayama practice. My background is in Kripalu yoga and prana kriya yoga, which is very pranayama intensive, using techniques strong kapalabhati and bastrika, strong kumbhakas, and bandha mudra practices. And I found that I could not do Kapalabhati in any way. I couldn't do any sort of stimulating pranayama, mainly because um, it really affected my mental health. I just couldn't regulate. I couldn't calm down. Constant fear, constant just fear of being alive and going out in public. And, it was also coupled with, COVID was happening, and there was major
Sure.
political disruption happening in the world. And so, I look back on it, and I never had a diagnosis of COVID. I never had a diagnosis of long COVID. Um, but when I look at the symptomology and what I was experiencing through that period of time, um, and when I got into the long COVID program, I was so happy to see the program that you offered it the first time I took it, when I heard about it the first time when I took it, that I think the main thing I got from the long COVID program was a sense of confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that this thing that was happening to me really, it was real. It was not something that I was imagining.
For
And
sure.
I've since had an opportunity to work with a few clients that are patients of long COVID, or are navigating through their own experiences. And one of the most common things I've heard from people is that they feel crazy that there's no consistency with their experience. Like one day, because one day I'd be fine. One day I would be fine, and then the next day I wouldn't be, and it would take days to kind of come back to a sense of normalcy again. And I
Exactly.
and
I
I
just
also
want,
really
oh, yeah,
oh
I
sorry.
just wanted to, from my own side, first of all, I'm sorry, because that is, it has been for you and others a very, very traumatic time, especially those of you who contracted COVID early on, because there was no test, there was no validation, and then because you got sick before that was official to get sick, and there's an official way to test that you were sick, then it's almost like it doesn't count, except you're living with it, so it very much counts. And then it's just anxiety that's all in your head and all of that, which of course people with chronic fatigue have been living with that kind of dismissive attitude from the medical world for decades, and it's been very traumatizing for them as well. So I just want to say that I'm sorry, and I'm glad that you are working your way through it and finding things that can help you, and also finding a sangha, other people with this shared experience. Um, it's it, it's starting. It feels like it's starting to shift. They are finding, as they're putting more research money behind exploring COVID, that they're coming up with novel ways to test what's really going on behind the scenes that's creating this complex malaise of symptoms, and why there's so much variability in how people respond. But I feel like there's still a big hole here, and it's the hole around breath is a big one, and it's one that it's one piece. It's not the whole thing, but it's one piece that can very much help and support people in their healing. And, um, you know, I'm happy that you're here and that you're doing this work and you're starting to share it with your clients. And students, I just want to mention that you are a yoga teacher and also, right? And you're also a body worker. You do structural integration. So you have a direct impact in other people that you can share what you've learned in your journey and bring that forward to other people, which is really a blessing. Yeah. So let's pick up your thread where we left off, where um, you were finding the program, and I don't even know actually how you heard of. Oh yeah, I do. You heard about it from your yoga teacher, right, Mary Bond?
Yes. Yeah, she's a structural integration instructor. She's longtime Rolfing instructor and studied with Ida Rolf. And I would also just say I'm a longtime Thai massage practitioner and a little less than longer time structural integrator Rolfer as well. Um, I was having a conversation with Mary and kind of reflecting with her on the experiences that I was happening and that I had to stop the intensive pranayama practices that I had been doing and working more with subtle breathing. There's a yoga teacher that I've been working with online, because that's one of the blessings I think of COVID is that we do have such a richer online contact with people. And I was working with a teacher named Peter Blackaby, and he's out of Brighton, England. He has a book called Intelligent Yoga, and I had I was referred to him because a student came to me and said that my teaching style was very similar to his, and I, wanted to get a glimpse of what that might look like, because as a yoga teacher, you really can't take your own class, and working with him, he used very subtle pranayama techniques. I would put it like if Kapalabhati and Bhastrika are one end of the spectrum, he's completely on the other end with what he's approaching for nervous system regulation. And he didn't call it the subtle breath or quiet breathing, but how he languaged was very much in alignment with those practices. And doing that work really helped me find a sense of internal regulation. Same with yoga nidra practices. I did some work with Tracy Stanley and with Octavia Rahim, who are both strong in those practices. And so I was having this conversation with Mary Bond one day on the phone and was telling her what I was experiencing. And she said, "Do you know Robin Rothenberg? I just heard of this podcast that she did, and she was talking about these things. And apparently, she has a book out, and she's looking at this." And Mary is, I think that's okay to say this. She's talked about this often. Mary is living with Parkinson's. And so she's using techniques to manage her Parkinson's experience. And she had heard about Buteyko and your teachings on Buteyko as a way of helping to navigate her current lived experience. And she said, I think it's okay to say this. She said something along the effect of, I don't know if I could sit that long in front of the computer to take this course, but if you're going to take it, I want to learn. I want to hear what you're learning. And we've had a couple opportunities to talk since I've started the program, and it's been really, I think, illuminating for her as well, and just the dialogue that we've been able to have about the experience. I
Great.
think she heard about you through podcasting, and then through the book, and then I went onto your website, and it was through your website to learn about the book that I learned about your long COVID program,
Yeah.
and just
Can we
reading
talk
through what
about
you
that
had
for a
there.
moment?
Yeah, yeah.
The restorative breathing for long COVID. So because that's where we met,
Yes.
right? And
Technically, you and I met a long time ago in Tom Meyer's Yoga U Online program that you were I think it was like a 14 module program
it
he
was
did, and that was my first encounter with you. And then when I was reading about the long COVID program on your website, the first thing was that realize was nobody in the yoga community I had found was talking about long COVID. Nobody was talking about using pranayama as a way of navigating long COVID experience. And since I had already been in that headspace of, did I have it? Did I not have it? Do I have long COVID? Do I not have long COVID? It something I really keyed into to take the program to glean some information from you on that. And the the main takeaways I had away from that from day one, it was just feeling a safe environment to talk about these things that, even my friends to some extent, like, I don't want to say people were dismissive, but I don't think people really understood how disruptive it had been to my life and how I had to let go of a lot of what my life was like before to get through 2020 and 2021. And then the second thing I took from the program was um, humming is amazing. Humming is just such a valuable regulating technique that I've worked with Brahmari pranayama, I've worked with sounding techniques before, and just it just clicked in a very different way and gave me a different way of being with myself. Um, and then the third thing I took from the long COVID program was just the way we did asana and the way you language through it wasn't, I, I don't want to say it was anything new. It was just a new lens to look at things that were familiar. And in that space that I had found, I realized there's just a whole part of my body over here that is stuck. And I don't want to say like it's muscularly stuck. It was an energetic experience. I think we were doing some sort of sideline thing with an arm over, I think is what it was, and just a very simple breathing technique. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was the space that was being held and that I was able to find for myself. And this whole incredible wave of fear came up. It was just very base, very, can I say, early age, maybe younger experience of fear that told me that there was something in me to work with. And that's really what led me to the Restoring Your Prana program and the investment of time for that curriculum. Um, I had read the book literally cover to cover and just ate it up. You have a beautiful way of languaging, and I like good writing. I like good sentences, and you had just such a very concise way of putting together information that it resonated for me specifically. And reading the book, especially the later chapters, that was the ones that really interest me. And so I signed up for the program, and I have to confess, I've been in the program since April. It's now September, and I'm almost finished with chapter two. Because what I found going through it, it took me several months to do that first chapter, and the analysis of my own breathing, to be able to sit and journal about that, and to just kind of be reflective on myself in a yogic way that maybe I haven't done. I started practicing in the late 80s. I started teaching in the early 2000s as a full-time career. And I, I, I did those kinds of things in teacher training, but there was something different about the way it was presented in doing the breathing logs that it was, I wanted to stay with the early practices for a while. I wanted to just stay with subtle breathing for a while, just as a lens to look at myself and to see how I was changing. When was I not subtle breathing? When did my breathing get noisy? What was I doing? So as a self-consciousness raising practice, I found the first chapter incredibly valuable. Um, and I went into it thinking, oh, I'm going to have this thing done in 10 months. I'm going to just do a chapter a month, get this thing banged out. I want the piece of paper, and on this, once I got into it, I realized, I don't care about the piece of paper at this point. I'm really interested in the lens it's afforded me as a yoga teacher to look at myself and take my time with it.
I'm so glad. It just warms my heart to hear that. And I see Melissa shaking her head too, as a mentor in the program. Like, I love that, because that really is the invitation of the first and second chapters, is just be with and get to know your own breathing and observe how your breath affects your life and your life affects your breath. And it came from my own experience with, I didn't have long COVID, but I had chronic respiratory issues and what had a respiratory crisis before COVID. It wasn't COVID related, but it was my own vulnerability combined with a respiratory infection that came, and I couldn't get rid of it. And it's all chronicled in the book. But the point is that when I started shifting my breathing and learning about breathing from a different framework than the framework of yoga that I had been, habituated to for 30 years, and sort of thought I knew and understood all about the breath. And then I couldn't do my pranayamas. I couldn't, I was having all of these health issues, and then discovered by breathing less as opposed to more, and developing my breath holds as opposed to trying to extend my exhale, very opposite of what I had learned, that I started getting healthier and better, and all of that. Things changed, and it made me so curious. And so, it was like I fell down this rabbit hole that was like the most fascinating thing to me in the world. Like, I eat this and it affects my breath, and I do this activity and it affects my breath, or my breathing is like this and then my mind goes like this, right? So, like, I spent the first 5 months basically on chapter 1 and 2. So, like, in my own way, like, that's where those questions and those practices came from. And it makes me very happy when people don't feel compelled to rush through that, and really want to just be with it, because I feel like that's really the big piece of it. And then everything else is sort of sprinkles on top, like learning the respiratory science and the chemistry between oxygen and CO2 and nitric oxide, and how all those things affect, and why kumbakas are so healthy, and even some of the more complicated things in the world of yoga in terms of the chakras, and putting together the mental psycho-emotional piece, which is really a big piece as well. But it's really starting with just be with your breath. Do you even understand this thing that you do 25, 30,000 times a day? Do you have a relationship with? Do you have a clue? Did you even know that you're doing this much? And anything you do that much is going to have a huge impact. And then you can learn the science later, but just be curious and interested. So yay, you are. So you're doing great in the program. A plus.
Well, and I think that's part of the it's part of the beauty. That's why it's self-paced, right? Because we want you to have that lived experience. If you're, if you race through and do all the quizzes and don't pay attention to what's happening personally, you're not going to learn it in the same way. You're not going to have the same transformation. So I love that you're really taking your time with it, because I know that you'll get so much more from it because you've done that. And that's why it's self-paced, because it's different for everyone. So some people, it takes them a long time, those chapters 1 and 2, because there's a lot there to observe. And then occasionally someone comes in, they've actually done some of that observation, and then they get to the biomechanics, and that's all new. And it's a different thing to dive into and adds a piece to their puzzle. And that's one of the things that I love. So I love that you're taking your time, and I think that's beautiful. And it sounds like from the long COVID workshop that you really got some useful pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that the long COVID workshop was a great intro to this piece of work. I think also for yoga teachers, I think it's important that we consider the effects of COVID and what COVID will have on our future student populations. And I think the environment that you created in that workshop is opening a dialogue that I don't see happening in the yoga community. Um, in many ways, I feel like the yoga community has left COVID behind, and left the conversation of COVID behind, left behind the conversation of safe public breathing spaces. And to me, that's key on ahimsa. I only teach online now. I used to be a traveling yoga teacher. I was leading teacher trainings for Prana Kriya Yoga, the school, different yoga studios around the country. And so I was in an airplane 2 to 4 times every month, every weekend, teaching weekend programs around the country. And I have left that aspect of my career. I no longer am teaching with Prana Kriya because I wanted to step back from teacher training, and because I wasn't comfortable going back into teaching in public spaces, because there's not really a lot of control of who is in that space and who is healthy in that space. I used to teach 5-day advanced pranayama intensives, and I used to joke on the first night of the program. You know, we say things and they come back to us later in our career, like, oh. And I used to joke on Friday night, if anybody came in with a cold, we all have it. And I feel like in public breathing spaces, that still is true. If anybody comes in with any sort of communicable infection, airborne infection, droplet-based infection, it is still present in those teaching spaces. It is still present in those community spaces. And if our first rule, yama number one, is ahimsa, is do no harm, I think it's inherent that we yoga teachers look at that conversation of, are we truly holding a space of ahimsa with everybody in the space? If we're breathing in public spaces and we don't have good air circulation and air purification that's happening there. And I say this knowing I am one of very few yoga teachers that is having this conversation. And because I've talked with my colleagues and not everybody's interested in the conversation. In fact, I watch the conversation kind of fades and the topic changes and we're not talking about protecting each other. And the only reason I say this is because, what is it, like 59% of infection transmission happens for COVID from people that are asymptomatic, meaning they have COVID and they're not expressing physical symptomology, or they are pre-symptomatic. They are infectious before they are exhibiting symptoms of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm really glad you're emphasizing this, that you brought this up. I think it's a very important conversation that we have in the world of yoga. The Jewish mama in me just was freaking out right away with when COVID came up, and everybody was all worried on the front end with the transmission and people dying, which I'm glad there were a whole bunch of people who were focused on that. But because of my training and my education in the breath, as soon as this was early on in the spring when I started having people with essentially what became known as long haulers or long COVID contact me, and I identified the overbreathing and the chronic, the coughing, and how all of that had depleted their CO2 and what was going on that biochemical level, and their diaphragm getting hyperactive from all of that overbreathing and the coughing. Whether or not they were on ventilators is even a whole nother layer for people who had to be on have ventilation, but that nobody was paying attention to that. And I kept saying, yoga people, like, hey, we have a job here. In my mind, I'm like, oy vey, these people are going to go into a yoga class and their teachers are going to have them doing Kapalabhati and Bhastrika, and it's going to tip them over the edge they're already teetering on. And nobody's talking about this. And I was like, it kept me up at night. I was like, well, what can I do? How can, so I started doing presentations and speaking about it. But it wasn't until we did the symposium, I think in spring of 2021, that was May of 2021, that we did the Wellness After COVID symposium. I did that with Give Back Yoga and the Minded Institute. And that it seemed like people were starting to go, maybe this long COVID thing is real, and maybe breathing has something to do with it, and maybe we should change how our orientation towards breathing and pranayama in the world of yoga. And then it seemed like there was interest in it, and then everybody's like, now back to normal. But there's people like you, symptomatic months, and now for some people years down the road. And the idea that you go to a yoga class and yoga teachers are experts in the breath, or even I'll take responsibility, yoga therapists who are training over other yoga therapists who think they're experts on the breath. Here we are, the two of us, right, William, who were in a position of training other people about breathing. And now I know what I didn't know. The level of avidya that I had about the breath, and I thought I was a breath expert, and I thought, oh, I'll just pass out this pranayama like candy. This is good, and this is good, and everybody do this, and everybody's happy. And actually, my pranayama practice was one of the things that was negatively impacting my health. When I was in a state of balance, it was okay. But once I got sick and my biochemistry went off balance, my pranayamas made it worse. And there's no question in my mind that that's true. And it's not to say the pranayamas are bad. Now I understand. Bhastrika and Kapalabhati are useful and they have a place in the world. They do not have a place for people who have hyperventilatory problems, which is often caused or exacerbated by conditions like COVID or other kinds of respiratory infections where people are coughing and breathing hard and being breathless and the lungs are impaired for long periods of time. It just, one of my breathing teachers, Rosalba Courtney, she's got a doctorate in breath science and has written over 8 papers, published 8, very evidence-based studies on breathing. And she's looked at long COVID, and 100% of the people that she had in her study on this showed signs of hypocapnia, of low CO2, which means that they are breathing more than their metabolic capacity to produce CO2, which means their pH is going to be off, which means they're going to feel like crap. There's just no way they're going to have energy. You've got to get the breath chemistry, the respiratory chemistry in balance so the mitochondria can function so you can have energy. That's how it works. So having people breathe a bunch when they're in that state is the absolute wrong course to follow to get them feeling better. And so I double highlight and underline your concern, and that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation and why I'm offering the programs I'm offering, and why I wrote the book. I mean, when I was sitting there with my teacher, Patrick McEwen, and learning all this stuff about respiratory health and science, and I'm sitting there going, I don't know crap. Like, I've been training people about how to work with people with chronic health issues, about breathing, and I don't know any of this. And this is like basic fundamentals about breathing, and I had really good teachers. I really honor and respect my teachers, but apparently their teachers didn't teach them, and their teachers didn't teach them because it wasn't being passed down. And we have to stop this. We have to become more sophisticated with our understanding about respiratory science, because pranayama is the center point. Breathing is the center point of yoga. We need to know what the heck we're doing. And now we're dealing with this, malaise, this condition where millions literally of people are suffering, and we have to bring them information and practices that are going to be supportive and beneficial to them and not make them sicker. We just must. That is ahimsa. It is our obligation to learn more. So thank you for stating what you're saying, and also for stepping back, because that's hard to do, to step back when you're in a position of, let's say, there's some status there. That's a very well-established program. You're a primary trainer, and to say, not only is this not healthy for me, like it's HIMSA for me to do it, but I actually recognize that offering this in this format is actually not, I can't get behind it anymore. So I have no doubt, William, that there is a future for you in teaching pranayama, but you're going to bring to it such a different understanding and depth so that your students are going to really benefit. You can hold all of it, not throw Bhastrika and Kapalabhati out, but just understand how to safely and when to safely apply it.
Mm-hmm. You know, you were talking just a moment ago about uh, what I was hearing you saying is one, all yoga practices are not beneficial to everybody. And you know, originally, like, yoga really was one-on-one, like what this idea of a group teaching model, that we are presenting a set of techniques universally to whoever is in the room, is not applicable. When I was talking with my mentor Carol this past week, we were going through the doshas, and we were talking about a little bit more about my experience with COVID and how it hit me. And in looking at how my life was before I got sick, I was in planes all the time, pressurization, repressurization. I was always sleeping in different beds. I was always eating different foods. My sleep was always disoriented. And so I was living a homeostasis, if you will, within a vata deranged lifestyle. And I think that's how most of us are. Like, most of us are a little deranged in how we live our life. And one of the things that I find fascinating about COVID is it, and especially long COVID, it doesn't hit everybody the same way. And it seems to be where people's weakest links are, is where their expressions are showing up. For me, like I said, it was in my ears. I went through a period of several weeks where I would stand up and I would fall down, and I didn't know I was falling. Like, my vestibular system was way out of whack. And to the point where I was really concerned something was wrong with me, because it was, again, it was intermittent. Some days it was good, I was fine, and then other days I would just move the wrong way, and it would really get thrown off. And so that's why, for me, like, it was up in my sense of balance, my sense of how to navigate through the world, if you will. And it also emotionally showed up the same way. I began to really doubt myself, really uncertain, didn't have a leg to stand on, if you will, didn't have an orientation of where is the right way to go, what is the right thing to do. And I think because for me it was vata derangement with that, and it showed up here, but for other people it shows up in such different places. To get back to what I was saying about group yoga teaching, if we are universally teaching the same thing to everybody, we really don't know everybody's specific story that they have in there and what they're working with. And so, yeah, Kapalabhati might be good for this particular person in this particular dosing and frequency and quantity, but that same amount for this person over here is potentially not the right thing for what they need. So I think it's an opportunity to look back on, how are we teaching yoga in general? Is this group model fully serving everybody?
Yeah,
Because
it's a problem
social
for
media.
sure. For sure, it's a problem, and
Mhm.
there's also something very, the communal experience and the sangha, and even online, people finding each other right in the pandemic and practicing together. There's something really that is very supportive on the level of Ananda, with we're doing this practice together, but it is a challenge because there's different levels of teacher training, and there's different depths even within a 200, or like, people say, but I've had X number of hours. I'm like, I don't care how many hours. What have you been studying? What are you practicing? Because hours
Mhm.
doesn't equal content or quality, right? So we
Mhm.
have to
Or
invest a bit more.
integration.
And integration, exactly, all of that. So, that's why I gave up yoga and I went into the world of yoga therapy, where it's all about customization and individuation, and really getting the intake and really learning about this person, and how do we basically mix and match the techniques of yoga, what asanas and what adaptation of asanas and what sequence of asanas is appropriate for this physical structure, and what pranayama, and as you say, titrating the dosage, and right, for this person, and what mantra, and like all of those things, really specific, what type of meditation is appropriate. Yoga nidra, yes, for you, but maybe for you, a walking meditation is better, right? Like really looking at that. And for me, it's much more fulfilling, and I feel more, it's not so much about control, but I just feel like I'm working in a responsible way because I'm actually responding to the individual in front of me. And I'm not flying blind and just throwing stuff out there that could potentially be good for somebody and potentially be really not good for somebody else. So it feels like, like you said, like it's safer space. I think there's a place for teaching yoga with more of that refinement. And I always say, like, not every yoga teacher needs to become a yoga therapist. Like being a really good, well-informed and present yoga teacher that is developing relationship with each and every student, like there is a really great value in that. But again, we have to raise the bar. So, yeah. And remember that the public doesn't know. I mean, the public is coming in, yoga is yoga. Most people who do not have experience with yoga, or even if they do, they just think yoga is yoga. Like hot yoga is the same as Vini yoga, is the same as Ashtanga yoga, or whatever. It's like yoga is yoga, but it's not. And even doctors who go, oh yeah, I've heard yoga is good for the back. It's like, well, not all yoga is good for the lower back, right? Like there's some yoga, like do not do that. If you have low back pain, it's going to make it worse. So all of that, we have to remember there's the level of education on the side of the public. And so we have a responsibility for being more educated and being part of promoting an educational process with yoga in general. But then this piece on the breath is really big as well.
Well, and I think it comes back also to that chapter 1 in the book where it's that svadhyaya piece, that self-awareness, so that you can notice how the practices are impacting you. And I think that that's so important. And William, you spoke about how there were a few things in the long COVID workshop that really had an impact on you. And I just think about, even in the Restore Your Prana program, there's so many tools that we ask people to do for, a number of weeks at a time, and to reflect on their experiences with those tools, not because those tools are all the tools that you'll ever need, and not because those tools are appropriate specifically for you, but which ones resonate for you. How can you fine tune the tools so they work for your situation? And then it's interesting to think about how in a group class, can we offer that permission to start to think about that fine tuning, right? Like that, how does it feel? How do you feel after the practice? How do you feel during the practice? How do you feel the next day? Are you sleeping well? Are your relationships going well? There's so many signs that our practices are working for us. And I think when we find those tools that work, they can make such a great difference. So you talked about the humming breath, and I've seen some of my mentees talk about how that's been a lifesaver for them, and the impacts of that. And I love how in the program we talk about, the many reasons of why that is. But that aside, just the lived experience of it, I think, makes such a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah. It's there's so much to this, and there's so much more than, so many people just disregard the breath in a way of like, well, everybody's breathing, I'm breathing, so it's fine, right? Like, then they don't correlate, like how you breathe might impact how you digest, how you breathe might impact how well you sleep. And that actually things like snoring and sleep apnea are actually dysfunctional breathing patterns. There's an indication of something either on the structural level or on the biochemical level, or a combination of the two, with your respiratory system that isn't working. And like that the jaw and the tongue, right, are very important parts of the respiratory system. I know, I just had reconstructed surgery last year to support my very small airway that is also a big impact on why I've had breathing trouble my entire life. Right. And last Sunday, I spent a whole day in a webinar with Rosalba Courtney, who I mentioned earlier, all on techniques for the musculature of the nose and of the tongue and of the jaw to support functional breathing. And of course, we did a lot of Brahmari, like Brahmari through one nostril, alternate nostril Brahmari, really amazing. Yeah. Anyway, more on that later.
William, I'm curious if you would mind speaking about how you're feeling now. So you talked a lot about your long COVID symptoms, and I know that you've been doing a lot of work. I'm just curious how it is now.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Changing my breathing has really helped a lot. Getting a very expensive night guard that was the best money I ever spent, getting a night guard and stopping the teeth grinding. And it was so bad, the teeth grinding, when the dreams were so bad. I had just had a crown put in, and within 3 months I cracked it. Like a brand new crown had cracked in half there. And that was my alert. Like, one, I don't want to spend that much money again, and um, something significant was happening. The Now I feel really good. I feel really content within myself. I still have my moments, but nothing like it was. Uh, I've had to completely change my lifestyle to get to this. Sleep is my number one priority. I prioritize getting a good night's sleep. If I don't get to bed early, I give myself permission to sleep in the morning to get those extra hours in. Um, Quiet breathing, subtle breathing techniques. That's in the shower, doing dishes, working in the yard, riding my bike. Like that's almost the mantra. Like, how am I breathing in every moment, and getting better at noticing when my breathing is not subtle. When am I holding it? When am I breathing hard or heavy? Like that's a key practice. Uh, I'm back at a point now, especially in these past couple of months, where I'm doing much stronger asana. I started doing push-ups again, and vanity thing. I feel good doing that. I don't. My body doesn't dislike it from doing those stronger practices. Um, a lot of it, I think, comes from the reflection these past months of just giving myself permission to do the hard work of looking at myself. That's
Get
yoga
your
right there.
energetic bank account in order, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah.
really what it is, that EBA piece that we focus so much on in the Restore Your Prana program. And for people with long COVID or chronic fatigue, like any kind of autoimmune issue, this is key. There's no magic pill. A lot of it is the hard work of looking at your life and where are you expending your energy and how are you expending your energy and how are you nourishing and keeping yourself well filled, and the pace of your life. And I mean, what you described, your life used to be where you're traveling all the time, in and out of airplanes and sleeping in different places, all of that, really, it's costly. It might be fun and sort of have that thrill and glamour, but it's costly in terms of our energetic body. It's a lot of output. It creates a lot of stress, and it requires a lot internally to manage and maintain it. And it's fine as long as there's no glitches in the system, but you get hit with something like COVID. And if you're already in that state of vulnerability, which I just want to say, in my experience in working with long COVID, people with long COVID, and I've had this verified by other colleagues of mine in the world of breath who are working specifically with people with long COVID. 100% of the time, it's the people who tend to have this very busy, kind of pushed lifestyle where they're always like striving for more and harder and like doing a lot of different things and really can't and don't want to give that up, don't want to make those changes, like really push and resist against it. And um, and that's the hard part. Like who am I if I'm not the person who's getting on the plane and doing these trainings? And like, and that is, I just want to say it's painful. It's hard to step back and go, I'm okay just being more of a homebody, or I'm okay sleeping in. I'm okay. You know, like it doesn't mean I'm a lesser person. It doesn't mean that I'm not good enough or I'm not doing enough, right? Like this is what I'm doing, what is sustainable.
Sustainability, I think that's a key piece with it.
Yeah.
You know, I came into this thinking, you know, I was a fairly healthy person. I take care of myself. And to realize that the ways I was taking care of myself long term might not have been serving me as well. That I was making choices thinking that they were advantageous, that they were good for me, beneficial, and maybe in the long run they weren't. Maybe at that point in my life that was okay, but at this point now, that way of living doesn't serve anymore. And I think people get into that with yoga. We were talking about different styles of yoga, and I don't want to trash on different styles of yoga. Every tradition has a benefit. Every type of yoga is a doorway to this singular wholeness that they're all pointing towards. So it doesn't matter how people get through the door. I think everybody finds their way. I do think, however, some of the yoga traditions that are most popularized potentially might be creating vata derangement, might be, you know, hot rooms, excessive heat, you know, daily practices of extreme function without rest and integration. Even things like ujjayi is such a staple in a lot of yoga teaching classes, and that's a constriction. From that to me has become a heavy breathing pattern. It's not a subtle breathing pattern to do ujjayi. There's a place for it, but as a standard routine practice, flip the switch, ujjayi started. Is that a good thing to do in every yoga practice? I question those things now. I used to just take it as the gospel of yoga, like it's all good. It's all just do the techniques and you're going to get the benefit. And now I feel a little more, gosh, I'm going to say the word conservative. I'm going to say
Well,
the idea of
discernment.
like
What I
not
hear is there's
everything.
more discernment about it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
when is it useful and when is it not
Hmm.
useful? And
Hmm.
understanding more, I think, of the facts, just the science, then you're able to understand again how to and when to appropriately suggest different techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say I'm happy for you that you're finding your way through this. And I really appreciate your being willing to come and share about your experience. I have a feeling there are some people out there that need to hear your voice,
Mm.
and will recognize and resonate with your story. And I know that the first time I spoke at, at the yoga therapy conference on this topic, and and I shared about my own story. Sorry about the echo. And I stared, and then I had yoga therapists coming up to me in the halls between sessions and kind of pulling me to the side and with such shame and tears, basically confessing, think I think what happened to you is happening to me. I think my pranayama is making me worse, right? Like and like the shame around it. And I just had no idea, but I think we need to be bold enough to begin to question, like, what are these practices? What are we really doing? What are we really asking our students to do? And is it appropriate? Right? Is this beneficial, or is this actually not beneficial? Is it taking them into, as I say, Sukkahville, more ease and, their happy place, contentment, or is it taking them into Dukkhaville, more suffering?
Dawn has a question. She says, William, thank you for sharing your long COVID story. It sometimes feels like a lonely place to be. How do you manage setbacks and relapses?
Sorry about that. Not in the recent past. I would say um, 2020 and 2021 were the worst. Like that was the worst of it. Getting into later 2021 and into 2022, I found more of myself coming back. I'll also say, like, I had a miracle happen and I was able to buy a house and I'm no longer a renter. And that feels like just such a monumental thing at 54 years old to have, and a yoga teacher to like been able to make that happen. And having a real stable home life now, feeling like I have a place for me. It's, as a renter, there's a big uncertainty there with that. And I also think getting into here is because of all the changes that I made in those other aspects of my life that allowed me to reorganize my headspace, my heart space, my financial space, to be able to get into here. And so this is being here has helped. One thing that I did constantly these past years is, as a body worker, when the shutdown happened, I stopped doing massage. I stopped touching people, and I've been a body worker for over 20 years. And I think there was a lot of energy that I was used to moving through that. And when that changed, I made a decision. Like it was very early in March. Like if I can't touch people anymore, I'm going to touch the earth. And I started doing gardening, and I started being outside, and that really had a significant impact of interacting with nature, of interacting with soil and plants, and watching growth happen, watching growth not happen, and seeing experiments of, with plants and all that, and having this beautiful yard to be able to play in. This is, I think, the earth has been probably the most consistent healing modality I've tapped into these past years, and
And of
and
course,
slowing
I love
down.
I love hearing all of this, and of course, this is all part of the yoga and Ayurvedic teachings as well. The elements, we're elemental beings, and we are in relationship with the elements in the world, and we can use the elements to balance us. And you talked about vata, like the air and the space, derangement of everything being kind of dispersed and going sort of out in the ethers, literally.
Mm.
And then the grounding of the earth and coming back and getting your hands in the earth and earthing yourself and bringing in that sense of stability and creating this stable space where you can live and ground, and how that affects, again, your energy system. And it's
Mhm.
also calming directly to the nervous system and helping to quiet all of that agitation that you spoke of with your symptoms and calming your symptoms down. And I hear you also, Dawn, and thank you for the question, because there is this sense of isolation that happens with chronic illness. And I think, and then also like the vulnerability, like I don't want to be exposed. So I'm not going to be in public spaces or whatever, even if you wear a mask, like feeling somewhat cut off and distanced from people. And there's not that level of intimacy and engagement, and so there can be a sense of isolation. And again, we really strive in our programs to make it a safe space and to create sangha where we can have conversations and share with each other from our personal experiences, and not feel so alone um, as we go through this process.
I think that's a key piece, Robin, and especially when you were talking about shame earlier. And that was a big part of what I had to work through, was a sense of shame that, I've been doing yoga all this time. I teach this stuff, and I couldn't fix myself. Like I didn't have enough resources to work with myself in that way. And that is one of the blessings of this program here, is it allowed me to look at the resources that I have, but to be able to work with them in a way, um, to bring it back to myself and to look at myself. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, William. Yes, Melissa.
I just wanted to chime in, just that the beauty of that fine tuning and finding the tool that works for you. And I love that the tools that they're different tools, right? It's not just about the yoga or the breathing practice. It's digging in the garden. It's, if you don't own your own home, maybe it's creating that, that little corner in your bedroom where, you have your favorite plant, you have your favorite picture, and you find a joy in that. So I love that fine tuning. I think it's so beautiful. We have one more question. Janelle is wondering about if you have how you're taking this to students. Like, if you could talk a little bit about how you're taking this work and working with students.
Sure, yeah. I teach online. If I could give a plug for myself, www.yogawithwilliam.com is where I teach. One of the classes I teach right now, it's Thursday nights at 7:30. I call it a breathing and restoring practice. And in that particular class, I consider that like my down tempo class, if you will. And that particular class is exploring these techniques that I've been learning through this particular program, as well as other things I found useful. It's not a restorative yoga class. I don't want to name it that. I consider it restoring as in revitalizing.
Yes.
So that's the main piece I teach in that particular class. And these techniques are threaded through all of the other classes that I'm teaching. I really try not to say the word ujjayi anymore. I don't refer to that. I call it the anti-ujjayi breath, the subtle breathing, or the quiet breathing techniques. And so yeah, it definitely. I have always been a teacher who, if you want to know what I'm practicing in my personal practice, come take my classes. I find I I work best with my own personal work through my teaching. Like that's how I integrate my work, and um, so it's key there. I also do one-on-one sessions with people through Zoom or in person. If you're here in Decatur, Georgia, or Atlanta, I can see you here. Um, so it definitely has woven in and continues to influence what I want to teach um, in this way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, William. It's been a
I just
pleasure.
want to say, as a mentor, I just want to say, and what a great way to get your homework in, that practice teaching. I love
it. Yeah.
Thanks, Willis. Yeah. So again, William, it's been delightful to have you here, and I'm really really pleased that you were willing and able to join us this morning. So the
Thank you for having me.
restorative breathing for long COVID workshop is coming up in October 14th and 15th. And if you're interested, all of that information is on the EYT Essential Yoga Therapy website, essentialyogatherapy.com, under events. And then if you're interested in joining us for the next Restore Your Prana training cohort, that is launching at the end of October, the 29th. So let me just clarify, the restorative breathing for long COVID workshop is for people with long COVID, just people with long COVID, any teacher or practitioner who is working with people with long COVID, including yoga teachers and yoga therapists, but I have other healthcare practitioners who have joined to learn more about how to work with the breath techniques, to work with the breath with their clients or patients. And then the training, the Restore Your Prana training, while the certificate program is to train yoga teachers, yoga therapists, and healthcare practitioners to be able to work with really in a very detailed and in-depth way for people with all kinds of dysfunctional breathing issues, not specific to long COVID. We also have a personal track for anybody who is really interested in doing this deep self-exploration, like William described, with their own breath. Maybe you just have your own respiratory issues, or you're listening going, God, I never put those pieces together. Yeah, I do have digestive issues. I do get some heart palpitations. Yes, I do have anxiety, like I never thought about as a breathing issue. And I would like to look at my breathing. And so the personal track is also an option. You don't have to be in a professional capacity to join that program. We have 2 different tracks. So please get in touch, and you can also reach out directly to me, Robin at Essential Yoga Therapy, with questions, or if you want to do one-on-one work, I also offer one-on-one work for people who want to do personal yoga therapy with me. So anything else that I'm missing, Melissa? Melissa's the person who keeps me organized and on track. So we doing okay? Yeah. All right. So thank you both so much. I do want to say I want to say one more little thing, which is all of the mentors for the Restore Your Prana program are certified yoga therapists, and they also have trained with Patrick McEwen, as I have, in the Buteyko breathing method. So they have really learned the respiratory science. So, and they all have done their own personal work around this and are deep practitioners. And they bring all of that to support each of you as you go through the Restore Your Prana program. So they are very dedicated and committed to being there, showing up 100% for their mentees. So even though it's self-study, you're never alone. You have them, and then we have our monthly Sangha gatherings where we have conversations and do practice together. So, yeah. Right. Thanks again to both. Melissa, you got a final.
That's it. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, William. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye.